right, so this is part 2 of the Lewis and Clark expedition assignment. Part 1 was an overview of where they went and what they were told to do. Part 2 is about their interactions and experiences with a very famous girl named Sacagawea, or as her people called her, Sacagawea. I'm just going to go through the answers to the questions, and you want to check your answers with mine. Mine is in the form of a PowerPoint. Yours is in the form of a Word document. So just make sure that you're following along and getting the answers that you need, especially the things that are highlighted, because as always, the highlighted material will be on the test. So when did they meet Sacagawea? You could have a couple different answers for this, depending on how you interpreted the reading. 1804 is probably when they met her, but you may have put 1805, and I can understand why you picked either one of those. It's not going to be a test question, but basically what happened was the Lewis and Clark expedition left St. Louis and traveled up the Missouri River, and they ended up spending the winter at Fort Mandan in North Dakota. So that's the answer to the where. So when they met her, it was either 1804 or 1805. In North Dakota at Fort Mandan. She had gone there actually to give birth to her child. And you can see her on that gold coin in my picture. Her child is on her back there. His name was Jean Baptiste. And she took him with her on the journey. Number 2, how did Sacagawea come to meet Lewis and Clark? Trace her experiences. So let's go all the way back to the very first thing that they say about her in the article. She's from the region where Idaho is today, and she was kidnapped from that region at age 12. She is a Shoshone Indian, and she was kidnapped by a different tribe, the Hidatsa tribe, at age 12, and they took her from Idaho over to North Dakota, and that's where they sold her as a slave. They sold her to a French-Canadian fur trader named Toussaint Louverture. No, I'm sorry, Toussaint Charbonneau. The wrong Toussaint. Toussaint Charbonneau purchased her. He's a French-Canadian fur trader, and he ended up making her one of his wives. Now, keep in mind, she was very young when this happened. She was definitely a teenager. And then, of course, when she gave birth to her son, Jean Baptiste, at Fort Mandan, she would have met Lewis and Clark. So that would be her experiences up to the point of meeting them. So she's had quite an interesting life already. Imagine just a little bit younger than you are right now, being kidnapped from where you live, not only your house, but the area, the geography where you live, and taken hundreds of miles away, and then being sold as a slave. And then that person who purchases you makes you his wife, and you really have no choice in the matter. And then you have his baby. So she's had quite an interesting life up to this point, and it's about to get even more interesting. So they ask her and her husband, actually, to accompany them on this trip. And the reason, primarily, was because they knew that this husband and wife team could interpret for them. She knows Shoshone and Hidatsa. So she can interpret from Shoshone to Hidatsa, and then her husband can interpret from Hidatsa to French. And then there was a third person in the party who could interpret from French to English so that Lewis and Clark and their men could understand what was happening. So they knew that they would be encountering these natives along the way, and having these people that knew all of these different languages was going to help a lot. She also helps them gather food. She dug for roots, collected edible plants, and picked berries. Remember, she's from the area where they're headed, and she has traveled that path before, so she would definitely be able to help them gather food that would not poison them. She'd be able to identify the plants that they could eat. There was a good story in there about, and this actually appears in their journals, this one time that a boat capsized and she actually dove right in the water without hesitation and recovered important papers that would have been lost had she not jumped in and saved them. Just her presence alone shows other Indian tribes that they encounter along the way that Lewis and Clark are on a peaceful mission. They certainly would not have traveled with an Indian woman with a baby if they were on some kind of mission to start war or something. So even just her presence with them showed other Indians that they could be trusted. And of course, she is a guide because she was taken along those trails as a child when she was kidnapped. She lived in the area of Idaho where they're headed because they have to travel through that way to get over to the Pacific Ocean. So there are a lot of different ways that she can be of service to them. The deal was that they hired her husband, but it was sort of a 2-for-1 deal. They both were going to help, and then in the end, they would pay him for his services. Number 4, what were Lewis and Clark's impressions of Sacagawea? They definitely appreciated her as a guide, and you can tell that by the way that they talk about her in their journals. And they also tell stories of how they considered her opinions. Like they would take votes, and she was one of the people that was allowed to vote. Everybody was allowed to vote. Even the slave that they took with them was allowed to vote. They valued the opinions and the feedback from everybody in the expedition. So that really shows that they respected her as well. So they appreciate her and they respect her. Number 5, what was the outcome of the expedition? First of all, they do all make it to the Pacific Ocean and back. After they leave Fort Mandan, they make their way out. They spend the winter at Fort Clatsop, then they make their way back, and everybody survives, including the dog, Shaman, that went with them. That was Meriwether Lewis's dog. It was a Newfoundland. So she does accompany them all the way out to the Pacific Ocean and back to Fort Mandan. What was their relationship like? They definitely respected one another and they worked well together. You can tell from the way they talk about each other in the journals. And it actually goes beyond that. After they got back, Sacagawea ended up giving birth to a daughter not long after getting back. And then not long after she gave birth to her daughter, Lisette, she died. She was pretty young. We think she was probably about 25 years old when she died. Clark ended up adopting both of her children after she died. Her husband went back up north and ended up living out his life as a fur trader and land speculator, and really didn't have anything to do with the kids. So William Clark adopted her 2 kids, Jean-Baptiste and Lisette. We don't really know anything about Lisette past infancy, and that could be because she was a girl and they didn't really keep records, or maybe she died. We don't know. But we do know that Jean-Baptiste grew up and, reached adulthood. And Clark saw to his education. He made sure he was educated. And he actually sent him to spend time in Europe with a German prince. So he definitely loved this boy. Obviously, he spent the first couple years of this boy's life with him. He watched him grow from an infant to a toddler. Because remember, that journey that they went on lasted 3 years to get out there and get back. So by the time they get back, he has spent the first few years of Jean-Baptiste's life with him, watching him grow up, and they grew to be very close, and he grew to love the boy. So he made sure that he was taken care of after Sacagawea passed away. So it's a really cool story about collaboration and friendship and ultimately love among these people. Let me know if you have any questions.